The void is never silent, not to those who know how to listen. Our kind has mapped the stars for millennia, tracing the patterns of radio ghosts and stellar sighs. We know the background hum of a galaxy like we know the rhythm of our own veins. But then there was something new, a resonance, an echo that bled through the fabric of our sensors, ancient yet unfamiliar. We dismissed it at first as cosmic noise, the erratic tantrums of dying stars. But then came the anomaly. It was not we who found its source. It was them. The humans, fragile bipeds of flesh and water, late to the galactic theater, arrogant enough to stand where elder civilizations trembled. They leaned forward into the dark as if daring the abyss to answer. And it did. We laughed at their audacity. Their ships were crude, welded metal coffins draped in primitive shielding. Their biology was brittle, dependent on air, food, warmth. Nothing about them spoke of destiny. Yet when the whispers brushed their ears, they did not recoil. They listened. Always listening, as though the universe whispered only to them. What they heard, we could not. What they understood, we dared not. But in their listening, they began to change. Subtle at first. Shifts in their speech, sparks in their technology, an unsettling light in their eyes. I remember the first human captain I saw after the echoes touched them. His gaze was not on me, nor my fleet, nor the stars. It was fixed beyond, toward something we could not fathom. And in that moment, for the first time, I felt it, the faintest tremor of fear. The chamber was carved from stone older than empires, its vaulted ceilings draped in banners of conquest. Every war we had ever waged, every foe we had ever crushed, their symbols hung in silence as we gathered. To us, this hall was sacred, where scholars of war debated not if we would triumph, but how swiftly. That day, the humans were our subject, a newly risen race, unrefined, disordered, and unbearably loud in the chorus of civilizations. Their sudden reach into the stars was an annoyance, their defiance of our patrol fleets an insult. Many of my peers dismissed them outright. "They are inconsequential," one hissed, his mandibles clacking in disdain. "Divide them, scatter them, and they will crumble." That is the law of lesser beings. Others, fewer in number, spoke with unease. "Their history is not one of crumbling," another countered. "Every time they fracture, they rise, stronger, sharper." His voice carried an edge I had rarely heard in that chamber. Respect. It unsettled me. I too mocked them once. I had seen their fragile forms, their chaotic governments, their primitive weapons. Yet curiosity drove me into their archives, and there, buried in their endless records of conflict, I saw the fire. Stories of struggle not for territory, nor for survival alone, but for ideas, for freedom, for dignity. My kind waged wars to expand. They waged wars to define themselves. That difference gnawed at me. We understood enemies who hungered for land, for resources, for power. But what of a species that bled for meaning? What walls could contain a force that refused to die, not because of necessity, but because they chose not to? The Council did not see it. They never do. They decreed containment, choke their colonies, blockade their trade, silence their growth before it could ignite. The decree passed with ritual arrogance, as it always had for millennia, but as I left the chamber, my claws trembling against the ancient stone, I knew. We had misjudged them. Again, we struck first. Of course we did. It was our way. Swift assault, overwhelming force, annihilation before resistance could form. Entire civilizations had crumbled in hours beneath our shadow, and so it was with the humans. Their fleets shattered in the opening blows, hulls torn apart and left drifting like ash across the void. Their planets burned as our bombardments scoured them clean, fire raining from skies that would never again know dawn. I stood upon the bridge of my warship as one of their worlds was turned to glass. The air above it shimmered with poison. The oceans hissed into vapor, boiling in anguish until nothing remained but barren, scorched stone. By every measure of war, they were finished. Any rational species would have surrendered, begged for mercy, prayed to vanish rather than endure more. But the humans did not. From the ruins they rose. Survivors clawed their way from collapsed shelters, skin blackened by fire, lungs choking on ash, eyes wild with fury. They carried no polished weapons, only scavenged blades, rusted rifles torn from our fallen, jagged fragments of steel sharpened into defiance. They did not cower. They sang. That sound still haunts me. Raw voices, cracked by smoke, lifted into the poisoned sky, not for victory, not for hope, but for defiance itself. Their song pierced our lines more deeply than plasma fire, a reminder that we had not broken them. My soldiers faltered, their gazes darting across battlefields where humans refused to kneel, where the wounded stood and bled rather than yield. "They cannot win," one of my lieutenants whispered, as though reassuring himself. Yet his mandibles trembled. "But what if we cannot silence them?" For the first time in centuries of conquest, I had no answer. Every empire collapses. I had studied it in the records of our history. The slow decline of power, the withering of armies, the inevitable fall into dust. But not like this. Not against prey. The humans should have withered beneath our fire. They should have fractured under the weight of their losses. Yet instead they changed. Faster than logic should have permitted. Faster than we could comprehend. Weapons we had long abandoned as obsolete, crude relics of forgotten wars were reborn in their hands as monstrosities. They retrofitted, reforged, reimagined tools of destruction into something viciously effective. Every discarded tactic we sneered at as antiquated, they sharpened until it cut us. In their chaos, they found rhythm. In their desperation, they found brilliance. I remember the first time their counterstrike fell upon us. It was not a measured blow, not the roar of an equal challenging us to battle. It was a storm. It came without pattern, without warning. One moment's silence. The next annihilation. Our fleets, proud and ancient, staggered under the fury of prey who refused to be prey. They learned us. They studied every weakness with feverish obsession, dissecting our formations, testing our reactions, bleeding for each scrap of knowledge until they knew us better than we knew ourselves. And when they struck, it was with our own doctrine twisted against us. The storm broke over one of our strongholds. I was there. Their ships poured through breaches we had sworn were impregnable, swarming like a tide of iron and fire. And then, in the haze of battle, I saw it, a flag. Crude cloth torn at the edges, stained with the blood of its bearer. Yet it rose high above the corpse of one of our warships. It was not merely a symbol. It was a warning. A declaration that they were no longer merely surviving, they were becoming, and as the storm spread, devouring system after system. I understood something our council never could. Our kind broke from within. It began as whispers. Too faint for the council to hear, too dangerous for the soldiers to speak aloud. The certainty that had bound us, that no lesser race could ever challenge our dominion, began to splinter. For the first time in living memory, I walked the barracks and heard my warriors murmur not of victory, but of fear. Fear of an enemy most had never even faced. "Humans," they hissed, their voices brittle as old bone. "They do not die as they should." I dismissed it at first. Superstition, I told myself. The ramblings of soldiers too long in the field. But then, I saw it spread, across fleets, across planets, across the very heart of our empire. Veterans who had once mocked their fragility now avoided speaking their name. Commanders hesitated before engagements, not because of strategy, but because they dreaded the thought of fighting them. Even I could not escape the infection of doubt. I remembered the battles, the survivors who rose from ash and ruin, the storm that devoured our proudest fleets. I remembered their voices, hoarse with smoke, yet unbroken. And the question I buried deep within myself began to gnaw louder. Had we awoken something meant to end us? Destiny was not a word our kind invoked lightly. We were conquerors, masters of cause and effect, architects of history. Yet the humans made me question everything. What kind of species bled so willingly, so savagely, not just for survival, but for one another? What kind of prey endured every cruelty we devised and rose again, teeth bared, eyes unbroken? Only the humans. Always the humans. I saw it then in the eyes of my people, a reflection of what we had once been before power softened us. We, the so-called apex, feared them because they reminded us of the hunger we had lost. The climax came not with silence, but with fire. We hurled everything into the abyss to erase them. Our fleets stretched so vast that entire constellations vanished beneath their shadow. Stars were blotted from view as our warships filled the heavens, a black tide that no world had ever survived. This was no battle, it was an extinction. We would end humanity here, crush them so thoroughly that even memory itself would fade. Yet still, they came. Their ships were fractured, scarred, limping from battle to battle. Many had no shields left, their hulls patched with scavenged scrap. And yet they advanced. They carried their wounded aboard crippled frigates. They buried their dead even as plasma scorched their decks. And still they came. Each vessel burned brighter than it should have, as though defiance alone kept its engines alive. I watched them with unease. For every strike we delivered, for every ship we shattered, they refused to break formation. They tightened ranks, pressed forward, bleeding but unyielding. It was not strategy, it was will. A will that eclipsed the void itself. And then I saw her. She stood upon the bridge of their flagship, a woman broken in body yet not in spirit. Her arm bound in makeshift metal, her face streaked with ash, she commanded with a voice that cut across the comms like thunder. She did not wield fear as our commanders did. She did not command through cruelty. Her weapon was a promise. We will not vanish. We will not kneel. Her words struck deeper than any missile. Across the battlefield, her voice rippled through channels we could not silence. Her soldiers answered not with silence, but with fury renewed. Even as their ships crumbled, they fought harder. Even as our fleets pressed, they surged forward. That voice carried through fire, through ruin, through death itself, and for the first time in my long existence, I felt it, fear. For I realized then what my kind had refused to see. We had mistaken fragility for weakness, but fragility was their weapon. It forced them to adapt, to grow harder, fiercer, sharper. Where we grew stagnant in our supremacy, they thrived in struggle. The battle raged, systems collapsing into chaos. Our fleets, though countless, faltered against their storm. Each loss they suffered only sharpened their fury. And as the humans tore through the void, unstoppable, I could no longer deny the truth. When it ended, the galaxy did not cheer. There was no triumphant chorus, no roaring declaration of victory, only silence. A silence so vast it felt unnatural, stretching across systems where once war had thundered without pause. Silence where fleets had clashed, where planets had burned, where billions had screamed their last into the void. Silence where once we had believed no silence could exist. We, the victors of countless ages, were left hollow. The weight of our defeat was not merely in ships lost or worlds surrendered, but in the fracture of belief. The belief that no lesser race could rise against us, that we were eternal, inevitable, that arrogance had shattered. We looked into the mirror of our own ruin and saw what we had tried to deny. We were not gods. We were prey that had grown fat and slow, and the hunters we dismissed had risen in our shadow, and the strangest truth of all, they did not exterminate us. They could have. I know this. We all know this. Their fleet stood above our shattered capitals, weapons primed, vengeance within reach. Our archives told us that prey once cornered strikes to kill, but they did not. Humanity stayed their hand. Instead, they left us broken, burdened not with extinction, but with the crushing gravity of our arrogance. They rebuilt what we destroyed, not to raise monuments to conquest, not to forge an empire from our ashes, but to restore memory. Cities scarred by fire were rebuilt with alien hands, not as prizes but as testaments. Worlds we had burned saw human ships descend, not to conquer but to heal. Where we expected chains, they left gardens. Where we expected execution, they gave silence. I did not understand. I asked one once, a soldier whose armor still carried the scorch marks of 1,000 battles. I asked why humanity, who had every reason to erase us, spared us instead. Why they left us alive when so many of theirs lay dead by our hand. The answer was a blade far sharper than hate. Because we remember what it feels like to be prey. That truth haunts me still. For in those words lay the secret of their strength, the wound at the core of their existence. They did not rise because they were powerful. They rose because they remembered weakness, because they carried the memory of chains, the memory of hunger, the memory of fire. They carried pain as if it were a weapon, and wielded mercy as if it were vengeance itself. And now, as the silence deepens, I wonder if mercy was the harsher fate. To be left alive, to endure the shame of being spared, to feel the weight of every ruin we caused, rebuilt not by our hands, but by those we sought to destroy. To live, and in living, to remember. The galaxy does not cheer. It listens. It remembers. Time will bury me, as it buries all things. The empires I served, the wars I waged, the arrogance that once defined my kind, all will fade into dust. Yet the humans remain. They do not reign as tyrants. They do not sit upon thrones of ash as victors. No, what they build is stranger and more enduring. They carve their scars into history, not as monuments to conquest, but as reminders. To themselves, to us, to the galaxy that once mocked them as fragile, primitive, inconsequential. Their ruins stand not as shame, but as scripture, a testament to endurance, to defiance, to survival. Their children grow not with songs of domination, but with stories of resilience. They are taught that the fire which nearly consumed them is the same fire they must carry forward, that their strength lies not in conquest, but in rising again and again, no matter the weight of the universe against them, and we, once their tormentors, now whisper their names in reverence. We who sought to break them, to erase them, to prove their fragility, are the ones broken instead. Their legends spread across the stars, carried not by their own voices alone, but by ours, by those who fought them and lived to know the truth. They became more than survivors. They became the storm itself, unstoppable, inevitable, a force that cannot be measured by fleets or worlds. For it lives in the marrow of every human who dares to stand when standing seems impossible. I do not know if the galaxy will endure their rise. Perhaps one day their fire will consume not just enemies, but themselves. Perhaps their hunger will reach too far, burn too bright. Or perhaps they will do what none of us ever managed, to turn survival into something greater, something eternal. But I know this: whatever destiny awaits, they have earned it. And when the last of my kind fades into silence, when even memory itself crumbles, I believe the humans will remain, not because they were destined to, but because they chose to.